A young woman of 20 years old was brought to live with us. I accepted without a word. 7 days later, she discovered that the properties George had promised her were already all registered under my name. I'm happy to have you here. Follow my story until the very end and leave a comment with the name of the city where you are watching from, so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The front door swung open and there she was. Lauren, all 20 years of her, with shining auburn hair flowing over her shoulders and eyes that gleamed with youth and determination. My husband George, aged 67, with more silver than brown in his hair, stood next to her, his hand resting protectively on her lower back. He spoke. "This is Lauren. She will be staying with us for a while." I stood motionless in the living room, a duster still in my hand from wiping the shelves that George had insisted must be cleaned before this special visitor arrived. Now, the reason became clear. "Nice to meet you," I said, my voice sounding strangely far away even to myself. Lauren smiled, but her smile did not reach her eyes. "George has said so many things about you. I found that very hard to believe." Later that evening, while I was preparing dinner, George's preferred pot roast, which he had specially asked for, I overheard voices from the study. Their conversation echoed through the heating vent connecting to the kitchen, a quirk in our old house that George had forgotten about long ago. "She seems pleasant," Lauren said, her tone meaning something quite different. "Linda, yes, she's harmless. She mostly keeps to herself," George responded. "Don't worry about her. She will adapt." Adapt. As if I was simply an outdated piece of furniture that needed to be shifted to create space for something fresh and dazzling. I prepared the table for 3, setting out the fine china we usually saved for special occasions. My hands shook slightly as I arranged the cutlery. More than 40 years of marriage, and George had never once spoken about wanting someone else in our lives. We had built everything together from the ground up, the small accounting office that transformed into a thriving firm, the modest 2-bedroom starter home that eventually turned into this vast 4-bedroom house in the town's most desirable neighborhood. "Dinner is ready," I called out, hating the faintness in my voice. They came out of the study, laughing over some private joke. George pulled out Lauren's chair, my chair where I had sat for decades, and helped her sit down. I took the seat across from them, feeling like a stranger in my own house. "This looks amazing, Mrs. Collins," Lauren said, her tone filled with fake sweetness. "Please call me Linda," I answered automatically. The social manners developed over a lifetime kicking in despite everything. "Linda makes the best pot roast in the county," George bragged as if highlighting one of the few precious traits I still possessed. The evening passed in a haze of polite chat and increasing unease. Lauren was studying business. She mentioned she met George when he gave a guest lecture at her university. He had been so motivating that she later approached him seeking guidance. Guidance? Was that the term people used now? That evening, George chose to sleep in the guest bedroom, explaining he did not want to disturb me with his late-night reading. I stayed awake in our shared bed, alone, gazing at the ceiling and reflecting on how we ended up here. Were there signals I overlooked? Was I so focused on managing our household, supporting his profession, and shaping our future together that I failed to see him drifting away? The following morning, I discovered George and Lauren at the breakfast table, heads close over their coffee. They straightened as I entered. "Linda," George said with a firm tone I had not heard since the beginning of our marriage. "Lauren will be staying for an indefinite period. I want you to prepare the blue bedroom for her." "The blue bedroom?" "Our daughter's former room before she relocated across the country. The space I had kept filled with all her childhood tokens." "But that is what I know," he interrupted me. "It is time to clear it out anyway. Emma has not used it for years." I nodded softly and turned away, unwilling to show the tears struggling to fall. "And Linda," George added, "we need to rearrange some things here. Lauren has fantastic ideas for updating the home." As I went upstairs to start emptying my daughter's room, I heard Lauren's quiet, intimate voice. "How?" When can we begin reviewing those investment portfolios you mentioned? I have countless ideas for your retirement planning. Soon, George replied. I just need to take care of a few things first. Later that evening, while carrying a basket of laundry past George's home office, I overheard him on the phone. Yes, everything is proceeding as planned, he was saying. Linda has no clue. Once I transfer all the assets, we will be set. I almost dropped the basket. Transfer everything? What exactly was he scheming? That night, I waited until George was asleep in the guest room and quietly entered his office. I had to grasp what was going on. What I discovered in his emails sent chills down my spine. Correspondence between him and Lauren spanning several months, their future plans together, and the worst part, his assurances to her regarding our financial security, the wealth and property we accumulated over more than 40 years of marriage. Little did they realize, 5 years ago during a tax audit, George moved all assets into my name as a safeguard, a fact he apparently forgot amid his obsession with youth. I shut his laptop and returned to our bedroom. For the first time since Lauren appeared, I experienced something beyond shock and heartbreak. I felt strength. It took 3 days to empty Emma's room. Every childhood keepsake I packed away felt like I was bearing fragments of my heart. Lauren observed silently from the doorway on the last day. One afternoon, with her arms folded, I gently placed the final of Emma's books into storage boxes. You do not have to keep all of that, she remarked, examining her perfectly manicured nails. George says you are too attached to sentimental things. It holds you back. I said nothing and continued carefully wrapping Emma's high school debate trophies in newspaper. Lauren stepped into the room uninvited and continued. I have been thinking about mint green for the walls, much fresher than this childish blue, and that old dresser needs to be removed. The dresser George had refinished when Emma was 13, the one with her growth marks penciled on the drawers inside. George gave me a budget for redecorating, she added with a victorious tone. He wants me to feel at home here. Home, this used to be my home. I had scrubbed every inch of the floors, painted every wall, and nurtured each flower in the garden outside. Yet now, I was treated like an unwanted housekeeper. That evening, George announced we were hosting dinner guests, his newest clients, a wealthy couple seeking investment advice. I will need you to prepare something impressive, Linda, he said without looking up from his phone. Lauren offered to help plan the menu. Actually, I was thinking it might be better to order in. Linda's cooking is traditional, but these clients prefer gourmet fare. George nodded as if this suggestion made perfect sense. Good idea. Order whatever you believe is best, he approved. My pot roast no longer met my standards. Neither did the dinner gatherings I had hosted for many years. These were occasions that had once helped George establish countless business connections. Now the evening felt like a performance I observed from the outside. Lauren took on the role of hostess in my dining room, serving dishes I had paid for on my own fine china. She laughed at precisely the right moments, touched George's arm in a way that seemed intimate, and spoke with confidence about investment techniques she had obviously practiced beforehand. George has been such a tremendous support, she told the guests as I brought in coffee. It is so essential for him to have that stability at home while he concentrates on growing the business. Growing the business. At 67, George had been talking about cutting back, not pursuing expansion. What game were they playing? Once the visitors left, I began to clear the table while George and Lauren stayed behind sipping wine. That went flawlessly, Lauren said, clinking her glass against his. They will absolutely move their portfolio to us now. To us? She spoke as if she was already his business colleague. Couldn't have done it without you, George replied, his tone warm and admiring, the same tone he once used with me many years earlier. I was thinking, Lauren continued quietly, we should begin exploring those vacation homes we talked about. The Florida market is ideal at this moment. Florida. George had always insisted he would never retire in Florida. Too humid, he had grumbled every time I suggested it. Soon, he assured her. He just needed to sell some assets first. That night, I could not fall asleep. I kept replaying in my mind the thought of those assets he wanted to sell. The assets we had built from 42 years of shared dedication and effort. The next morning, while George was taking a shower, I opened our safe. Inside, there was a folder with all our vital papers, property titles, investment records, and insurance agreements. I laid them out across our bed, confirming what I already suspected. Everything, the house, the company, the investment holdings, even the cabin by the lake, was all legally under my name. 5 years ago, when George faced a possible lawsuit from an unhappy client, our attorney had recommended transferring everything into my name as a safeguard. George agreed immediately, signing the documents while saying jokingly, "It is all yours anyway if I die first." Now, I wondered whether he even remembered that conversation. I gently placed the papers back into the safe, locking away the reassurance I had just discovered. For the first time since Lauren's arrival, the tight feeling in my stomach eased a little. They could scheme and plan all they wanted, but the base on which they were building their hopes belonged to me by law. The following week brought more changes. Lauren started rearranging the living room without consulting me, swapping out our family photographs for contemporary art pieces. She shifted my favorite reading chair, the one near the window where I had spent countless evenings, to make space. She had this costly exercise bike delivered. "We need to update this place," Lauren told me when I found her rearranging my kitchen cabinets. "George says everything here is stuck in the past," just like she stopped herself, but her meaning was obvious, just like me. I said nothing, just nodded, and kept preparing dinner. Let them think I was weak, confused, defeated. Let them believe I had no fight left inside me. Each night, I endured their private conversations, their subtle jabs about my being outdated in my own home. George started pointing out flaws he had never mentioned before. My clothes, my hairstyle, the way I folded his shirts. "You could learn a thing or two from Lauren," he said one evening, as she walked into the room wearing an outfit costing more than our monthly mortgage. "She knows the value of appearances in the business world." I had helped build that business, had worn practical clothes and sensible shoes while working side by side with him during those early days, answering phones and managing books when we could not afford employees. But those memories seemed erased, for George replaced by the charm of Lauren's youth and ambition. One afternoon I overheard them again in the study, their voices raised slightly. "I do not understand the hold-up," Lauren said with a sharpness in her voice I had never heard. "You promised me we would start moving things by now." "These things take time," George replied, sounding defensive. "The accounts are complex. There are tax consequences." "Tax consequences?" Lauren's voice became sharper. "Or are you just delaying? Is Linda becoming an issue?" No, George," he reassured her quickly. "Linda never questions anything, never has. She trusts me entirely." I pressed my hand against my lips to suppress a bitter laugh. He was correct about one thing. I had never doubted him. I had trusted him fully. But that trust vanished the moment he brought Lauren into our home. That evening, George revealed his intentions to update our house. New furniture, new appliances, even removing walls to create an open-plan design. "Lauren has fantastic ideas to bring this old place into the 21st century," he said, beaming at her. "We'll begin with the master bedroom. Our bedroom, the space where we had shared 4 decades and 2 years of life, where love was made, arguments settled, dreams shared, and losses endured." "Whatever you think is best," I whispered, noticing how George's face briefly flickered with relief and a hint of confusion at my continued agreement. While clearing the dishes that night, I overheard Lauren's voice from the living room. "How soon can we review those investment portfolios? I have some ideas for restructuring." "Soon," I thought silently, as I dried the wine glasses, much sooner than either of them anticipated. 3 weeks into Lauren's stay, I had mastered the skill of invisible. I moved through my own home like a spirit, speaking only when addressed, agreeing with everything, and hiding my true feelings behind a facade of surrender. Throughout it all, I observed, listened, and devised a plan. I began taking walks in the afternoons, something I had never done previously. George and Lauren did not question this. They appeared glad to have me out of the house. What they did not realize was that these walks led me to Linda Peterson's office. Linda had been a close friend since college, long before I even met George. She was also one of the top divorce lawyers in the region. This situation is unmistakable elder abuse, Linda explained at our third meeting, her voice strained but measured with controlled anger as she examined the notes I had been keeping. Emotional manipulation, isolation, financial exploitation. Yet I argued that he had not actually taken anything. He cannot. Everything is in my name. Linda's eyes sharpened. That is what he has forgotten. But what will happen when he remembers or attempts to force you into signing documents? I had never thought about that. The idea of George coercing me to sign papers sent a shiver through me. Document every detail, Linda advised, sliding a small diary toward me. Record times, dates, conversations. Take photographs of any alterations they make to the house. Send me any emails or messages. And Lauren, she added softly, be cautious. At home, I kept up my facade. The dynamics of doxal acceptance played out in my daily efforts. I prepared meals that went unnoticed, tidied up spaces that Lauren would quickly rearrange, and feigned ignorance when cherished family belongings vanished, replaced by contemporary decorations that Lauren claimed were more stylish now. We need to talk about the lake cabin, George declared one evening in late September. We were at dinner, or rather they were dining, while I nibbled on a small portion at the far end of the table. What about it? I asked, keeping my tone calm. Lauren believes we should sell it, he said, avoiding my gaze. Use the proceeds for some investments she has been exploring. That cabin had been our sanctuary for 3 decades. We built it with our own hands, spending weekends hammering and varnishing floors. Our daughter had learned to swim in that very lake. I had scattered my parents' ashes along its shore. If you think that is best, I replied, concentrating on slicing my chicken into perfectly equal pieces. See, George turned triumphantly to Lauren. I told you she would understand. Lauren gave me a look filled with both suspicion and satisfaction. Property prices in that area have tripled, she added. It just sits empty most of the year. It makes financial sense. Financial sense, as if that cabin could be measured merely in money and square footage. Later that night, I stood by the bedroom window, watching a sudden autumn storm batter the maple tree in our yard, the same tree George and I planted on the day we moved in. Lightning flashed. The yard was briefly lit up by sharp, sudden flashes, and memories of a storm from many years ago came rushing back. Back then, we had gathered under warm blankets during a blackout, making plans for what lay ahead by the soft glow of a candle. Where had the man I once knew disappeared to? When did he change from being my partner into someone who regarded me as nothing more than a problem? The next morning, I found them together over coffee, closely examining real estate listings. Lauren was confident the cabin would sell for at least $400,000, tracing figures on a spreadsheet. That amount would be enough to begin reorganizing our investments and put a down payment on a condo in Naples. Naples? I could not resist asking. Florida, they both looked up in surprise as if they had forgotten I was there. Just looking at possibilities, George said smoothly. For the future, Lauren added, with an emphasis that was gentle yet clear. I nodded and made my way to the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I poured my coffee. Through the serving hatch, I heard their voices drop to a whisper. She's growing suspicious, Lauren said quietly. We must hurry, George replied with frustration in his tone. The cabin situation is tricky because it was registered only in my name, a gift from George, on our 30th anniversary to shield it from any business risks. Later that day, I called Emma for our usual weekly talk. I still had not mentioned Lauren to her. A part of me could not bear to break her perception of her father or confess how rapidly my life had fallen apart. "You sound different, Mum," Emma said, her tone filled with worry despite the great distance between us. "Is everything all right?" "Just exhausted," I lied. "Your father has been occupied with work." "At his age?" I assumed he was slowing down. I shifted the topic, asking about her children, my grandchildren, who lived so far away that visiting often was impossible. As we continued talking, a determination grew inside me. This involved more than just myself now. It was about Emma, about her children, about the legacy George and I had created together, that he now seemed ready to discard for a woman younger than our daughter. After ending the call, I went back to the safe and took out my folder of important papers once more. This time, I made duplicates of everything and placed the originals in a safety deposit box I had opened at a bank different from the one George used. I included our marriage certificate, birth certificates, tax returns, anything proving our long history and joint efforts in what legally belonged to me. As I secured the safe, I heard Lauren's voice coming from downstairs. "When can I meet your financial advisor? You promised I could join the next meeting." "Soon," George answered, repeating the word he had been using for weeks now. "I just need to prepare him first. Walter is a bit old-fashioned." Walter Schmidt had been handling our investments for 15 years. He had come to our anniversary celebrations, sent holiday greetings, and witnessed our family grow, truly old-fashioned. That night, I lay awake, listening to the strange creaks around the guest bedroom where I now slept. George had reclaimed the master bedroom, insisting he required the adjoining office area for his late-night work. More likely, he sought privacy for his nighttime calls with Lauren, whose room was conveniently nearby. I reflected on the life we had created, the memories woven into every part of this house, and the careless cruelty with which George was wiping them away, erasing me in the process. For a moment, sorrow threatened to consume me again, but beneath that pain, something else began to grow, a steady, icy resolve. Let them go ahead with their plans. Let them believe I was a weak old woman, crushed and too defeated to resist. Their arrogance would undo them. In the darkness, I allowed myself a faint smile. They had no clue what was on the horizon. As October came, the tension in the house intensified. Lauren stopped pretending to be kind to me when George was not around. Her true nature showed through sharp remarks, the way she would, accidentally, topple my belongings, and her demands cleverly disguised as polite requests. She would say, "Mister, do be a dear and wash my cashmere sweaters," dropping an armful of costly clothes at my feet. They require special care. I handled the laundry meticulously, following every care instruction. I prepared their meals with the same attention, all while sensing the growing hostility that filled the air. They tidied up their messes and preserved my appearance of silent acceptance. Meanwhile, I kept taking my afternoon strolls to Eleanor's office, recording every insult, every discussion about their intentions for my property. "You are creating a solid case," Eleanor assured me as she examined my recent notes. "But we must exercise patience. Let them make the initial move." Patience had never been a strong point for me, yet I was learning. I had waited 42 years for my husband to unveil his true nature. I could endure a little longer before he faced the consequences. The turning point occurred on a rainy Tuesday. I was upstairs folding laundry when I overheard Lauren's voice from George's study, sharp with irritation. "I do not understand why we are delaying. You promised we would begin transferring assets by now." "It is complicated," George answered, his tone tense. "There are legal matters involved." "Legal matters?" Lauren's voice intensified. "Or are you having doubts? Because I have put everything on hold for this, George. I turned down other chances to be with you." "Other chances?" Older wealthy men, perhaps. I know, darling. I know, George's voice soothed. Listen, we have that meeting with Walter on Friday. We will start the process then. The entire process, including the house. Yes, everything, I promise. Once we explain the situation, he will assist us in transferring everything into our names, George declared. Our names, not his and mine, but his and Lauren's. I clenched Standing by the doorframe, reflecting on myself, I realized that was their strategy, to confront Walter together and coerce him into assisting with transferring my assets. What they did not expect was that Walter had been among the very first people I contacted. Upon uncovering George's betrayal, he was already prepared for what was to come. The following day, George mentioned he would take Lauren shopping to find something appropriate to wear for the meeting with Walter. Financial advisors value professionalism, he said to her over breakfast, as if I was not present, as if I had not attended countless financial meetings during our marriage. I was considering that navy suit from St. John's we saw online, Lauren responded, flicking through her phone. The navy one with golden buttons? Exactly, George agreed, his eyes softening with fondness, the same look he once reserved for me. After they left, I contacted Walter immediately. They are arriving on Friday, I informed him. George believes you will help him transfer everything to him and Lauren. Walter exhaled deeply over the line. I have known you both for 15 years, Linda. I never imagined George would... He paused, professionalism holding him back from expressing his true feelings. Neither did I replied calmly. But here we are. I will proceed with the plan we agreed on, Walter assured me. Just be ready for the consequences. I ended the call, a strange sense of peace washing over me after nearly a month of pretending to be the submissive wife and swallowing my pride firmly. My moment was approaching, the conclusion finally visible on the horizon. When George and Lauren came back, she was carrying numerous shopping bags from luxury boutiques. They were laughing, lost in their own bubble, until they noticed me quietly seated in the living room. Mister, George said, his smile dimming somewhat. I thought you would be out for your walk. It is raining, I responded, indicating the window where raindrops traced the glass. Right, he said, seeming uneasy. Well, we have had a productive afternoon. I can see that, I replied, glancing at the shopping bags. How many thousands of dollars had he spent on her today? Funds from our shared accounts, money saved together through decades of careful budgeting. Lauren smirked and intentionally leaned on George, a casual closeness meant to hurt me. George has excellent taste, she said, her gaze daring mine. Yes, I answered calmly. He always did prefer shiny new things. Her smile wavered a bit. For the first time, I broke away from my usual routine of silence and submission. That evening, the house buzzed with expectation. George was unusually considerate at dinner, praising my cooking, asking about my day. Gestures likely aimed at easing his guilt before Friday's treachery. Lauren observed his attentiveness with barely disguised annoyance. Twice I saw her glance at her watch, as if measuring how long it would be until I no longer mattered. I was thinking, George said as I cleared the table, we should have Walter. Dinner was planned shortly after the meeting on Friday to celebrate our new financial path. That sounds wonderful, I told him, the lie smooth on my tongue. I could prepare his favorite beef Wellington. Excellent, George smiled broadly, pleased by my ongoing compliance. See, Lauren, I said, Myrtle will come around once everything is clearly explained. The following day slipped by in a fog of anxious energy. George spent countless hours on the phone, speaking softly in voices I could barely catch. Lauren tried on her new suit multiple times, admiring herself in the mirror, practicing what she called her professional smile. I kept up my usual habits, quietly collecting the last pieces of proof Eleanor had asked for. I made copies of credit card bills showing George's recent lavish purchases for Lauren. I took pictures of the renovations they had done to the house, my house. I recorded a conversation where they talked about gradually excluding me from financial decisions. By Thursday night, their excitement was barely hidden. The mask of normality had fallen away, exposing their true plans. "This time tomorrow," Lauren said, lifting her wine glass in a private toast with George. "We will be heading to our future," George answered, clinking his glass against hers. I slipped to bed early, unable to bear watching their celebration. In the guest room, the space that was once my sewing room, before Lauren decided it should be turned into a proper guest suite. I sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one. 42 years of memories played like a film in my mind. George and I as newlyweds, in our very first apartment, painting the walls side by side, bringing Emma home from the hospital, summer barbecues filled with laughter, and cozy winter holidays. The peaceful assurance of growing old together, or so I believed. How had it come to this? When did his love turn sour, allowing him to replace me so easily, to cast me aside without a second thought? The reason no longer mattered. What truly counted was what came next. Friday morning broke with a bright and clear sky. George was already up, humming as he showered. Lauren spent a full hour perfecting her makeup before stepping out in a sleek, expensive new suit, looking confident and determined. "We should leave in 20 minutes, George said, glancing at his Rolex watch. "A gift from me on our anniversary years ago." "Walter values punctuality," Lauren replied, smoothing her skirt. "First impressions mean everything." I kept busy in the kitchen, deliberately avoiding their gazes. Let them believe I was unaware. Let them think it was just another ordinary day. As they got ready to leave, George hesitated at the kitchen doorway. For a brief moment, a flicker of what seemed like guilt crossed his face. "We will talk when I get home, Linda," his voice softer than it had been in weeks. "About the future, about arrangements. Arrangements as if I were nothing more than a piece of furniture to be moved aside." I nodded silently, unable to find my voice. The front door closed behind them. The daughter closed the door quietly behind them. I watched through the window as they climbed into George's Mercedes. Lauren took the passenger seat where I had sat for many years. They drove out of the driveway toward Walter's office, approaching their crucial moment. I reached for the phone and dialed Eleanor. "They are on their way," I whispered. "The time has come." I spent the following 2 hours trapped in a strange twilight, moving around the house like a shadow from my own existence. I adjusted picture frames that Lauren had intentionally tilted. I watered neglected plants. I slowly reclaimed small corners of this battleground that had once been my sanctuary. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my parents, chimed 11 times. By now, they must have been sitting inside Walter's office. By now, they would understand. I pictured the scene, Walter's carefully composed, neutral face as George laid out their restructuring plans. Lauren's confident smile began to fade as Walter examined the documents. The moment of truth, when George realized his fortress was unstable, that legally he held no power to make the transfers he claimed. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. "They just left Walter's office," she said without any introduction. George looked as if he had seen a ghost. Lauren was almost running to keep up. "They are heading your way." My heart hammered against my chest. "What happened?" Walter asked as he called me. Immediately afterward, he mentioned that George demanded transferring the investment accounts into joint ownership with Lauren. When Walter clarified that was impossible because all accounts were registered solely under your name, George insisted there must be some kind of error. Eleanor's voice revealed a grim sense of satisfaction. Of course there was no error. Walter presented the paperwork showing George's own signature on transfer documents dated 5 years ago. I sank into a chair, feeling my legs suddenly weak. According to Walter, Lauren's face turned pale as she began insisting on seeing proof. When Walter produced the documents, she stormed off. George followed her, attempting to explain. I thanked Eleanor and ended the call just as the sound of tires crunching on gravel signaled their return. Moving to the living room window, I watched George's Mercedes screech as it stopped in the driveway. Lauren was first to get out, slamming the door so violently the car trembled. The perfect calm she once held was shattered. Her face twisted with rage as she yelled at George over the car roof. I could not catch her words through the closed windows, but her anger was undeniable. George's shoulders slumped and his hands lifted in a calming gesture while he followed her toward the house. I settled into my armchair by the fireplace, the very chair Lauren had tried to exile to the basement. Folding my hands in my lap, I waited patiently. Suddenly, the front door flung open and Lauren stormed inside her costly heels, clicking harshly on the hardwood floor I had. She had maintained a perfect facade for many years. Suddenly, she stopped in her tracks when she noticed me sitting there, her eyes narrowing into sharp slits. "You," she whispered with venom, her voice trembling with fury. "You were aware all along." I said nothing and simply met her gaze without wavering. George appeared behind her, his face pale as paper. "Linda, I can explain." "Explain what exactly?" I asked, my tone calmer than I truly felt. "How you intended to throw away 42 years of marriage. How you brought this woman into our home and expected me to serve her. Or how you forgot that everything we built together is legally registered under my name." Lauren spun to face George. "You told me everything was yours. You said it only needed to be transferred." "I believed it was true," he argued, running his hand through his thinning hair. "The transfer was merely a formality for tax reasons. I never imagined that to be the case." I interrupted sharply. "You never imagined. You never imagined I would uncover your scheme. You never imagined I would defend myself. You never considered me at all." George looked at me like I was a complete stranger. The quiet, obedient wife he had taken for granted was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. "How long have you been aware?" he asked, voice strained. "Since the beginning," I answered. "Since the night you brought her home. I heard your promises to her. I read your emails. I watched you prepare to discard me as if I were worthless." Lauren's anger switched its focus. She turned back to George, poking a perfectly manicured finger into his chest. "You have destroyed everything." "Have you? Do you have any clue what I have sacrificed for you? The chances I let slip by, and now I discover you don't even have control over your own finances." "Lauren, please." George reached out to her, but she pushed his hand away. "Do not touch me. You are pitiful. A miserable old man who could not even manage to leave his wife properly." She faced me, her lovely face twisted with loathing. "And you scheming old hag. You let us make plans. You acted like this helpless little homemaker." I replied softly. "I did not pretend. You only saw what you wished to see. You saw a woman easy to dismiss. You never bothered to look beneath the surface." George collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "Linda, we need to discuss this. We can find a solution." I asked, "Like what? Will you send her away? Return to faking affection? Or do you still intend to drain our life savings to finance your midlife tantrum?" Lauren gave a bitter laugh. "There is nothing to drain, George. She owns everything." She grabbed her purse from the table where she had thrown it. "I am not staying for this fiasco. Call me once you have untangled your chaos and your money." "Lauren, wait!" George jumped up, reaching for her. "Wait for what? More deception? More empty promises?" She jerked her arm free from his grip. "I gave you everything and received nothing but disgrace." "That is not true, George," he protested. "I love you, truly." She spat the word with venom. "Love does not cover my expenses. Love does not create the life you once promised me." She moved toward the door, pausing only to deliver one last harsh word. "Do you know what hurts the most? I actually began to care about you. What a complete waste." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving an empty silence. Through the window, I saw her storm down the driveway, her phone already pressed against her ear as she called for a ride. No doubt George stood frozen, staring at the closed door as if hoping Lauren would come back. When he finally faced me, his face looked older by decades in moments. "She will calm down," he said, his voice hollow, filled with disbelief. "Once she grasps the situation, she will return." "The situation?" I repeated. "You mean the fact that you tried to steal from me? That you brought your mistress into our home and expected me to serve her? That situation?" "It was not like that," he said firmly, but he could not meet my eyes. "Then how was it, George? Tell me. Help me understand how after 42 years I became so unimportant that you could treat me this way." He had no response. He slumped back onto the couch, defeated, a man watching his carefully built illusion fall apart around him. "I never intended to hurt you," he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. A laugh escaped me, short, bitter, and completely humorless. And yet here we are. Outside, a car horn blared. Lauren appeared from beside the house where she must have been waiting, her phone still in her hand. She climbed into a waiting Uber without looking back. George watched her leave, anguish etched deeply on his face. I felt no pleasure in his sorrow, only a heavy sense of exhaustion. This man, who had shared my bed, my home, and my life for more than 4 decades, was suddenly a stranger to me. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I rose to my feet, squared my shoulders. "Now you gather your belongings. Eleanor will send the divorce papers tomorrow. You can stay at the house until you find a permanent place. You're kicking me out." His eyes opened wide in sincere disbelief. "After all we endured?" "No, George," I said, feeling much older than my 65 years. "You pushed me out weeks ago. You just never bothered to say it. 1 year. That is how long it took to unravel 42 years of marriage." The divorce was finalized on a crisp autumn morning, similar to the day George first brought Lauren home. I signed the papers in Eleanor's office, my hand steady, despite the gravity of the moment. Eleanor had arranged a settlement, even she admitted was exceptionally fair. I kept the house, the cabin, and most of our assets. George received enough to begin anew, which was more than he deserved, but less than he had hoped for. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor had asked when I outlined the terms. "You could claim everything." "I do not want everything," I had answered. "I only want peace." And that was exactly what I discovered in the month that followed, although it arrived in ways I had not anticipated. The first alteration I made was to my bedroom. I gave away the king-sized bed where George and I had shared countless nights over many years, and replaced it with a cozy queen-sized one that belonged solely to me. I painted the walls a gentle shade of seafoam green, a color George would have disliked, but it brought a smile to my face each morning when I opened my eyes. The second transformation involved reaching out to Emma and finally revealing everything to her. Our conversation was lengthy and painful, filled with her shock, anger, and eventually tears. "How could he do this to you?" she asked, voice trembling with emotion. "To us," I explained calmly, surprising even myself with the absence of bitterness in my tone. "People change, or perhaps they do not change at all, and simply reveal their true selves over time." Emma flew back the following week, bringing her husband and children along. Together, we cleared the house of Lauren's previous touches and many memories that no longer felt right. We repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and planted new flowers in the garden. The sound of my grandchildren's laughter now filled rooms that had been quiet for far too long. "Will you sell the house?" Emma asked, as we sat on the porch swing, watching the kids play outside. I reflected on the question, gazing at the home where I had spent most of my adult years. "Not yet," I decided firmly. "It is mine now, truly mine, and I want to live there on my own terms for some time." The third change was going back to school. I gave up my education when I married George, putting aside my dreams of becoming an art teacher to support his goals. Now, at 66, I signed up for art classes at the nearby community college. My hands, worn from many years of housework, remembered the joy of holding a paintbrush. My mind, long consumed by George's needs and desires, began to rediscover the happiness of creating something just for myself. Half a year after the divorce, I organized my first small exhibition in the college gallery. There were landscapes of the lake near our cabin, painted with oils and soft pastels. I invited friends, neighbors, and even a few of George's former clients who had contacted me after our separation. To my amazement, people came. They admired my paintings, and some even purchased pieces. I did not send an invitation to George, but he showed up anyway. I noticed him standing at the back of the gallery, older and grayer than I remembered, observing me quietly as I explained my technique to a curious couple. Our eyes met briefly across the room. He gave a single nod, a hint of respect in his eyes, and then slipped away before I could decide whether to approach him. Later that evening, Emma called to check in on me. "How was the exhibition?" she asked. "I'm sorry I couldn't come." "It was wonderful," I told her, curled up in my new reading corner by the fireplace. "George came." There was a pause. "How did that make you feel?" I thought for a moment. "Like watching a movie about someone else's life," I answered finally. I recognized the people involved, yet I no longer felt any bond with the narrative. Lauren laughed softly. "That is probably the healthiest reaction I have heard from a client," she said. I joked that I had a competent attorney and an even more remarkable friend. Our discussion then shifted to various subjects: Lauren's daughter's applications to college, my forthcoming journey to visit Emma, the book club we both had joined, ordinary life beginning to rebuild itself around the void left by my failed marriage. The fourth transformation proved the most challenging: learning how to be alone without succumbing to loneliness. After many years spent coordinating my days with George's timetable, preferences, and needs, I needed to find my own rhythm. Some mornings, I had breakfast at noon. Some nights, I remained awake until sunrise, painting, reading, or simply enjoying the silence within my home. I discovered my taste for spicy dishes, which George had always refused, and developed a love for international films that he had dismissed as showy. Gradually, I unveiled the woman who had long been hidden beneath the identity of George's wife. Nearly 1 full year after Lauren's arrival, I received a letter from George. The envelope rested on my hallway table for 3 days before I summoned the courage to open it. "Linda," he wrote with handwriting more careful than I remembered. "I have started and stopped writing this letter many times. There is no proper way to express how sorry I am for what I did to you, to us. I could blame a midlife. Fear of growing old or a dozen other excuses might explain it, but the truth is much simpler. I was selfish and hurtful to someone who deserved only compassion from me." The letter went on for 3 pages. It shared thoughts about our relationship, admitted his own betrayal, and offered news about his new, smaller life in an apartment across town. He was working part-time at a friend's accounting firm. He had started therapy. He had reconnected with his brother after years of estrangement. "I do not expect forgiveness," he concluded. "I do not even expect a reply. But I wanted you to know that I now truly see you in a way I failed to for far too long. The strength and grace with which you handled my betrayal humbles me daily. I hope you are finding joy on your own terms. You deserve nothing less." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my desk drawer. I did not reply, but I also did not throw it away. Some wounds heal better when left undisturbed. That spring, I chose to host a garden gathering for my newly formed circle of friends. These were women I met through art classes, book clubs, and volunteering at the local library. Most were my age or older. Many were divorced or widowed. All were lively and engaged with life in inspiring ways. We assembled on the patio I redesigned, sipping wine and sharing stories as the sun slowly descended toward the horizon. Looking around at these women, my friends, my chosen family, I felt a deep sense of calm, to new beginnings. "Beginnings," said Claire. a retired nurse who had become one of my dearest confidants, raising her glass for a toast. "And to timeless wisdom," I responded, clinking my glass gently against hers. Later, as the night grew quiet and guests started to leave, Claire stayed behind to help me clear the plates. "You seem quite content, Linda," she remarked while efficiently loading the dishwasher in the method she had taught me, so unlike how George had always demanded it to be done. "I am," I answered, a bit surprised by the honesty of my feeling. "No regrets?" she asked, eyebrow lifting curiously. I pondered her question, reflecting on the journey that had led me here, the humiliation of those weeks with Lauren, the ache caused by George's betrayal, and the anxiety and uncertainty of beginning anew at 65. No regrets, I concluded, only thankfulness. For what? I smiled, recalling the moment when Walter had disclosed to George and Lauren that all the assets were in my name, an unexpected turn of events that restored my strength, my voice, my life. For second chances, I said, and for realizing that I was always more resilient than I believed. That evening, I stood in my garden as darkness settled in, listening to the crickets and watching fireflies flutter around the flowers I had planted myself. My house, my home, glowed softly behind me, filled with fresh memories and opportunities instead of shadows. 42 years I had devoted to George. Now, the years ahead belonged entirely to me. Alone to enjoy, to treasure, and to live according to my own rules. For the very first time in my life, that sensation felt like something beyond sufficient. It felt like it meant everything. Now I want to know about you who are listening to my tale. If you were in my position, what choices would you make? Have you ever experienced something similar? Please share your thoughts below. Meanwhile, I am placing on the last screen 2 other stories that have become favorites on this channel, and they will certainly astonish you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.